The sun was already high over downtown Chicago, its light spilling through the tall glass windows of Golden Pearl, one of the city's most elegant Asian fusion restaurants. The place was alive, a symphony of sounds. Soft clinking glasses, chatter in multiple languages, the steady hum of jazz in the background. Waiters moved swiftly like dancers, balancing trays of colorful dishes, while the scent of sesame and ginger floated through the air. And there, in the middle of that polished chaos, worked Elaine Porter. She was easy to overlook. Dressed in her plain black uniform, apron tied neatly around her waist, her curly hair tucked under a modest cap. To the busy lunchtime crowd, she was just the cleaning lady, someone who wiped tables, carried trays, smiled quietly, and disappeared into the background. But if you looked closely, if you really looked, there was something different about her. The way she moved had a quiet grace, as though every motion carried a hidden story. That afternoon, she was humming softly under her breath, an old tune she used to hear years ago in Beijing. It wasn't English. It wasn't even a song. It was a few gentle syllables in Mandarin, something that had stayed with her long after she left that faraway country. The rhythm came naturally, like a piece of her soul, still speaking the language of her past. At that moment, Rebecca Hall, the restaurant's new manager, was standing nearby, overseeing the lunch rush. She was young, sharp, ambitious, the kind of woman who believed she knew everything about how the world worked. She noticed Elaine's humming and paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "What was that?" she asked, her tone curious but edged with sarcasm. Elaine looked up, a little startled. "Oh, sorry, Miss Rebecca. Just an old tune. I picked it up years ago when I was teaching abroad." Rebecca tilted her head. "Abroad? Where exactly?" "China," Elaine replied softly, still smiling, as she gathered a few used napkins from the table. "I lived there for many years." Rebecca let out a small laugh, not the kind that comes from amusement, but the kind that cuts through the air with disbelief. "You? In China?" She looked Elaine up and down, her tone turning sharp. "So, what? You picked up a few words from tourists or something?" Elaine didn't answer right away. She'd heard that tone before, in job interviews, on buses, even from neighbors who couldn't believe a black woman could ever live a life full of travel, learning, or success. That same voice that told her to stay in her lane. "I actually speak Mandarin fluently," Elaine said quietly, her voice almost apologetic, as if she were confessing a sin instead of sharing a gift. For a moment, Rebecca blinked, then smirked. "Oh, come on. Mandarin? You're saying you speak Chinese." She looked around at the nearby waiters, some of whom were clearly uncomfortable but said nothing. "I've studied business Mandarin for 2 years and still can't order a meal properly. But you," she motioned toward Elaine's uniform, "you're telling me you can speak it fluently?" Elaine's hand still for a moment on the table. She wanted to defend herself, but something inside her told her not to. Not out of fear, out of wisdom. She had seen too many people let ignorance win arguments that didn't need fighting. So she simply smiled, that same gentle, unbothered smile that made others uncomfortable because it carried quiet confidence. Rebecca folded her arms. "Right. Sure. Maybe next you'll tell me you can read the menu better than our chef." The other staff tried to hide their unease. One of the younger waitresses, Maid, looked at Elaine with an apologetic glance. She knew what Mandarin was supposed to sound like, and the tune Elaine had been humming was perfect, flawless even. But she stayed silent. No one wanted to challenge the new manager. "Anyway," Rebecca continued, waving her hand dismissively, "maybe stick to cleaning, yeah? Leave the language stuff to people who actually know what they're doing." Elaine just nodded slightly and went back to her work. She didn't cry, didn't argue, but her heart trembled for a moment, not from pain, from memory. Because years ago, on the other side of the world, she had stood in front of a class of smiling Chinese children who called her Elaine Lauscher, Teacher Elaine. They loved her for her warmth, her patience, her kindness. She had taught them English, but in the process, they had taught her something far more powerful: how to see the beauty in connection, how to break barriers with empathy instead of pride. Now, here she was, in a shiny restaurant, being mocked for the very skill that once made her proud. But Elaine didn't hate Rebecca. She couldn't. Life had already taught her that hatred only poisons a heart that holds it. Instead, she felt pity, not the condescending kind, but the soft, compassionate kind that comes from understanding someone's blindness. She saw in Rebecca not evil, but ignorance, a kind of arrogance that came from never being forced to see beyond one's comfort. So she whispered to herself, "It's okay. One day she'll know." As the hours passed, Elaine kept moving, clearing glasses, resetting tables, smiling at guests. But inside, she was somewhere else, remembering the laughter of her students in Beijing, the smell of spring rain on old temple streets, the peace she once knew. She missed that life. She missed being seen for her mind, not her color. When her shift ended, she went to the back room to gather her things. May, the young waitress, followed her in quietly. "Elaine," she said softly, glancing over her shoulder to make sure no one heard. "I heard you earlier. That was real Mandarin, wasn't it?" Elaine looked at her and smiled. "Yes, sweetheart, it was." May's eyes lit up. "It was beautiful. My grandmother used to sing that same melody. I recognized every word." Elaine chuckled lightly. "Your grandmother must be a wise woman." May hesitated, then asked, "Why didn't you tell her off? The manager, she was so mean." Elaine looked down at her hands. Tired hands, lined from years of work, but still gentle. "Because kindness speaks louder than pride," she said softly. "Sometimes it's not about winning the moment. It's about showing who you are, quietly, patiently. The truth doesn't need to shout." May nodded slowly, her eyes filled with respect. As Elaine walked out into the cool evening air, she pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. The city lights glimmered like stars reflected on wet pavement. People hurried past her, lost in their own worlds. She thought of her late husband. How proud he'd be to see that she still carried grace through hardship. She smiled to herself, whispering in Mandarin, "Wahen hao, qing biu yao dan xin." "I'm doing fine, please don't worry." It was a whisper of strength, a prayer of endurance. Words carried by the wind of a woman who refused to let cruelty harden her. Somewhere behind her, the restaurant lights dimmed and Rebecca's voice echoed faintly through the closing doors, barking orders and complaining about something trivial. Elaine didn't look back. She didn't need to, because the day would come very soon, when her quiet strength would silence every ignorant word and her voice, spoken in perfect Mandarin, would echo louder than any insult ever could. And when that moment came, it wouldn't be revenge she felt. It would be grace. The night after that humiliating encounter, Elaine lay awake in her small apartment. The city outside hummed softly. Sirens in the distance, laughter from strangers echoing down the block. But inside, her world was quiet, too quiet. She stared at the ceiling, thinking about how far she had come and how easily people like Rebecca could look at her and see nothing but color. It hurt, yes, but it didn't surprise her anymore. What surprised her was that it still stung, even after all these years of trying to pretend it didn't. When sleep finally came, it carried her back in time, to Beijing, to another life. The memories came in vivid flashes, like scenes from a film. The narrow alleys of old hutongs, the smell of roasted chestnuts in winter, the laughter of children calling her Lane Lauscher, their tiny voices full of warmth. She remembered the early mornings when she and her husband, David, would walk to the bus stop together. He was a mechanical engineer, tall and kind, with a smile that could melt the coldest day. He'd carry her bag and tease her for packing too many books. "You can't teach the whole country at once, sweetheart," he used to joke. And she'd laugh, knowing that teaching wasn't just her job. It was her calling. Elaine had fallen in love with China, the way one falls in love with music. Gradually, then all at once. The language fascinated her. The culture humbled her, and the people welcomed her in a way she'd never expected. She learned Mandarin not from textbooks, but from conversations in markets, from her students' laughter, from the kindness of neighbors who brought her dumplings when she was homesick. She absorbed every sound, every tone, every idiom, until she could speak with fluency that made even native speakers do a double take. For 12 beautiful years, Beijing was her home. She and David built a life there, modest, peaceful, filled with meaning. They had one daughter, Naomi, who grew up speaking both English and Mandarin like two halves of her heart. Elaine would tuck her in at night, whispering stories in both languages, one about courage, the other about kindness. She wanted her daughter to know that both worlds were hers to love, that no color, no border could limit her spirit. But life, as it often does, turned suddenly. David died in a construction accident just before Naomi's 10th birthday. Elaine remembered the knock on the door, the look in the neighbor's eyes, the sound of Naomi's cry, sharp, breaking, endless. For days, she couldn't speak. For weeks, she couldn't breathe. The city that had once felt alive now felt heavy and foreign. The world around her blurred. The language she'd mastered seemed meaningless in the face of loss. She decided to return to America. It wasn't because she wanted to leave. It was because she needed to survive. She thought going home might help her heal. But when she arrived, she discovered a truth that hit harder than grief. Home wasn't home anymore. The country she'd left had changed. The world looked at her not as a teacher, not as a widow, not as a woman rebuilding her life, but as a statistic. Her degree from abroad was dismissed as unverified. Her job applications vanished into silence. One interviewer smiled politely and said, "We don't really need language teachers like you. Maybe try housekeeping work?" He thought he was being kind, so she took what she could. She cleaned offices, schools, restaurants, always with the same dignity she'd had in her classroom. People called her maid, helper, sweetheart, never Mrs. Porter, never teacher. But she didn't let it harden her. When people were cruel, she prayed for them. When people were kind, she thanked them twice. She'd whisper to Naomi, "Don't ever be ashamed of me, baby. Every job that feeds you is an honorable one." And Naomi would hug her tight, whispering back, "I know, Mama. I'm proud of you." That night, lying in bed, Elaine touched the pendant she always wore. A small jade stone David had given her their first year in Beijing. "For peace," he'd said, "so you'll always carry calm with you." She ran her fingers over it now, eyes glistening. The words Rebecca had said replayed in her mind, cutting like glass. You people could never learn Mandarin. She wanted to forget them, but they echoed louder each time. She wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of proving herself. Tired of pretending not to notice when others doubted her worth. But under that exhaustion was something stronger, a quiet flame of grace. She thought about her students, little Li Wei, who used to stutter until she helped him sing his lessons in rhyme, and young Malin, who once said, "Teacher Lane, you speak with your heart, not just your mouth." That memory made her smile through her tears. Those children never cared about her color. They only cared about her kindness. She turned toward the window, where the moon hung low over the city skyline, and whispered softly in Mandarin, "Sheshe, Lao Tianyi," rang with Jishu Rene I. "Thank you, Lord, for letting me still believe in love." The next morning, Elaine woke up early. She ironed her uniform, made coffee, and packed Naomi's lunch before heading to work. Her heart was still heavy, but her steps were steady. She decided that day she would not hide who she was anymore. At the restaurant, she greeted everyone warmly, just as she always did. Some of the waiters smiled back. Others avoided her eyes, still remembering the awkwardness from the day before. Rebecca walked in later, all confidence and perfume, giving out instructions like a general. When she passed Elaine, she didn't say good morning. She didn't have to. The silence between them said enough. But what Rebecca didn't know was that behind that quiet smile was a story larger than her prejudice could imagine. Elaine wasn't just a woman who cleaned tables. She was a woman who had taught children halfway across the world, who had buried her love and still found the strength to rise every morning, who spoke not only English and Mandarin, but also the universal language of kindness. She carried within her something Rebecca couldn't see, the power of resilience. Later that afternoon, during her short break, Elaine sat in the corner of the staff room, sipping her tea. Maid, the young waitress, joined her, asking questions about China. Elaine told her stories about the festivals, the lanterns, the snow on the Great Wall. She even taught her a few words in Mandarin. When May repeated them back, Elaine laughed softly. "Perfect," she said. "You'll sound like a native in no time." Rebecca passed by the door, overhearing the laughter, but ignored it. To her, it was just background noise. She didn't yet know that those gentle lessons, that soft-spoken woman she dismissed, would soon become the center of a story that would humble her forever. For now, Elaine simply sipped her tea, her eyes distant but warm, her spirit calm. She didn't seek revenge. She didn't crave attention. What she wanted, what she needed, was something much simpler, to be seen for who she truly was. She believed that one day, the truth of her heart would speak louder than the color of her skin, louder than anyone's assumptions. And when that day came, she wouldn't gloat, she would forgive, because that's what real strength looks like. It doesn't roar. It endures. It keeps loving even when love feels like the hardest choice. And somewhere deep down, Elaine knew her moment of quiet triumph was coming. The universe always gives grace to those who walk humbly, even through fire. The next day began like any other, quiet, unassuming, almost ordinary. But destiny has a way of disguising extraordinary moments in the clothes of the familiar. The morning air outside the restaurant carried the scent of rain and roasted coffee. The city pulsed with its usual rhythm. People hurrying, horns blaring, dreams colliding in the crowded streets. Inside Golden Pearl, the staff prepared for a busy afternoon. Elaine arrived early as always. She walked through the glass doors with a gentle smile and the calm that only comes from someone who has survived storms much larger than a bad day. She greeted everyone warmly. "Good morning, Maid. How's your son doing, Carlos?" Small kindnesses that made her presence like sunlight peeking through a cloudy room. No one could ever say she wasn't kind. Even those who judged her secretly admired that about her. Rebecca, the manager, walked in later, brisk, confident, distracted. She wore a fitted blazer, and the air of someone who thought control meant superiority. She barely glanced at Elaine as she passed. The restaurant would be hosting a special lunch for a group of Chinese investors who were evaluating potential partnerships with Golden Pearl's owner. It was the kind of event Rebecca had been dreaming of, her chance to impress the board and finally prove she could handle big clients. She wanted everything perfect. The lighting, the table setup, the wine temperature, every detail mattered. But sometimes the universe chooses its own way to test pride. Around noon, 3 black luxury cars stopped outside. The investors entered, 6 impeccably dressed men and women, their faces calm but observant, speaking softly among themselves in Mandarin. Their presence changed the energy in the room. The staff straightened their posture. The chef double-checked each plate. Rebecca plastered on her best professional smile and approached them with forced confidence. "And I how?" she said, her pronunciation awkward. "Welcome to Golden Pearl. I'm Rebecca, the manager." The guests nodded politely, but it was clear they didn't fully understand her English, and her attempt at Mandarin didn't help. Still, they smiled graciously. Rebecca led them to a reserved section, promising the best experience. But as the order began coming in, small mistakes started piling up. A wrong entree here, a misheard request there. The waiters were confused, unable to follow the investors' conversation. Rebecca tried to step in, but her Mandarin, which she often bragged about learning, failed her miserably. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, speaking faster among themselves. The restaurant's rhythm began to crack under pressure. Elaine, who had been quietly clearing tables nearby, noticed the tension building. She saw Rebecca's smile falter, saw the investors' faces tightening with polite frustration. One of them pointed at his dish and spoke quickly in Mandarin, trying to explain that it was the wrong order. Rebecca just nodded cluelessly, muttering, "Yes, yes, of course," though she had no idea what he said. A bead of sweat rolled down her temple. Her dream lunch was turning into a nightmare. "Can anyone here speak Mandarin?" she finally snapped, her voice sharp with desperation. The room fell silent. The waiters looked at one another, eyes wide, afraid to answer. No one moved. And then, from the corner of the room, Elaine's gentle voice broke the silence. "I can." Rebecca turned, eyes widening in disbelief. "Elaine," she said, half laughing in disbelief, "this isn't the time to joke around." But Elaine didn't joke. She placed her cleaning cloth down neatly. straightened her uniform, and walked toward the table with quiet confidence. Her steps were soft, but each one carried the weight of dignity. She approached the guest with a warm smile, bowed slightly, the way she'd been taught years ago in Beijing, and began to speak. Due Bu Chi, she said kindly, her voice calm, melodic, and fluent. Women can engouts wa nin de jian sai lu, wa lai bong nin kanken. I'm so sorry. We might have mixed up your order. Let me help you check it. The transformation was instant. The investors' faces lit up with relief. Their tension melted away as they recognized the authenticity in her tone. Not just the words, but the rhythm, the respect, the understanding. One of them smiled widely. Ni de zhongwen shua de hao yao bu qi. Your Chinese is amazing. Elaine chuckled softly. Xie nin, thank you, she replied, and continued speaking with them naturally, clarifying their concerns, translating their needs to the kitchen, apologizing with genuine grace. Within minutes, the atmosphere shifted completely. Laughter replaced frustration. The guests began complimenting the restaurant, praising its hospitality. From the back, the entire staff watched in awe. Even Rebecca stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, unable to process what she was witnessing. The woman she had mocked, the one she dismissed as just a cleaning lady, was now the reason the event was being saved. Elaine didn't show pride. She didn't gloat. She simply did what she always did, gave kindness where others offered cruelty. She guided the conversation effortlessly, her Mandarin flowing like music. The investors even invited her to sit for a moment, curious about her story. You speak so fluently, one said. Where did you learn? Elaine smiled softly, her eyes shining with a quiet nostalgia. I used to teach English in Beijing, she replied. I learned from my students. They were wonderful teachers. The table burst into laughter and admiration. They spoke for several minutes about Chinese culture, food, and language. Elaine answered with humility, never mentioning how she had once been a respected educator, how she had lost everything and rebuilt her life with her bare hands. She didn't need to. Her grace spoke for her. When the meal ended, the investor stood and shook her hand personally. You made our lunch unforgettable, one of them said. Your kindness shows what true hospitality means. Elaine bowed slightly again, her heart full, but her expression calm. Thank you for letting me help, she said softly. As they left, Rebecca finally found her voice. Elaine, she called, trying to sound casual, though her voice trembled. I didn't know you could actually speak Mandarin like that. Elaine turned toward her, her smile gentle but unreadable. Yes, ma'am. You didn't ask. That answer struck deeper than any anger could have. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't bitter. It was pure truth, delivered with quiet dignity. The rest of the staff looked at Elaine differently now. Even Maid, who had known bits of her story, felt a swell of pride in her chest. The woman everyone overlooked had just changed the entire day. Not by force, not by revenge, but through kindness and strength. As Elaine returned to her cleaning duties, Rebecca stood still, watching her. Her chest tightened with something she hadn't felt before, shame. Real, deep shame. The kind that doesn't burn outward, but inward, eating away at arrogance. She realized how blind she'd been, how her pride had made her small. Later that night, when the restaurant finally closed, Rebecca sat in her office, staring at the reports from the investors. Every single one of them had written glowing feedback, praising the staff's hospitality and naming Elaine personally. Your employee, Elaine, one note read, represents the heart of your restaurant. Her empathy transcends language. Rebecca's hands trembled slightly as she read the words. She thought back to the moment she'd laughed at Elaine, the way she'd said, "You people could never learn Mandarin." The memory now made her sick. Outside, Elaine was gathering her things. Her shift was over, and her bus would arrive soon. Rebecca watched her from the doorway, uncertain how to approach. For once, the confident manager felt small in the presence of the woman she had dismissed. As Elaine turned to leave, Rebecca finally spoke, her voice low. "Elaine, thank you. You really saved us today." Elaine paused, looked at her, and nodded gently. "We all have different gifts, Miss Rebecca. Sometimes they just don't fit the titles we wear. And with that, she walked out, not as a maid, not as a worker, but as a woman who carried grace like a crown. Outside, the night air was cool. The city lights shimmered, reflecting on puddles left by the afternoon rain. Elaine looked up at the sky, whispering a small prayer of gratitude. She didn't need applause. She didn't need to prove anything. The world had seen enough arrogance. What it needed was quiet kindness, the kind that heals without noise. She smiled, her breath forming a faint mist in the cold. "It's enough," she murmured. "Kindness is enough." And in that single moment, somewhere deep inside her heart, she knew her story, the one written through pain, loss, and prejudice, was not one of defeat. It was one of grace overcoming cruelty, humility defeating pride, and love speaking louder than hate ever could. The next morning, the sunlight streamed to the tall windows of golden pearl, turning the white linen tables into sheets of gold. The air smelled of fresh polish and jasmine tea. Everything looked the same, but something had changed. There was a quiet hum of excitement, the kind that follows after witnessing something extraordinary. Word had spread among the staff like wildfire. Elaine, the cleaning lady, spoke Mandarin better than anyone in the restaurant. It was a moment none of them could forget. The way she had calmly stepped forward while the manager panicked. The way she had saved the restaurant's reputation. The way she had spoken like a woman who had carried that language not as a trick, but as a part of her soul. When Elaine entered, the same staff who used to overlook her now greeted her with warm smiles. May waved from the counter. Carlos offered to carry her cleaning supplies, something he'd never done before. Even the chef peeked out from the kitchen and gave her a respectful nod. Elaine smiled at them all, her heart swelling with gratitude, but she stayed humble as ever. She didn't crave attention. She just wanted to do her job well and spread kindness where she could. Rebecca, on the other hand, had barely slept that night. She had spent hours replaying the moment in her head. Elaine's calm voice, the investor's laughter, her own stunned silence. For the first time in a long while, Rebecca felt the weight of shame pressing on her chest. She had always thought herself worldly, cultured, educated, the kind of person who understood diversity. Yet when it truly mattered, she had judged a woman by her color, by her uniform, by her own assumptions. When she saw Elaine that morning, something inside her tightened. Elaine was kneeling by the front counter, arranging flowers in a vase. The sunlight hit her face, and for a second, Rebecca saw her differently. Not as an employee, not as someone below her, but as a woman with depth, with grace, with history. "Elaine," she said, her voice softer than usual. Elaine looked up, smiling kindly. "Good morning, Miss Rebecca." Rebecca hesitated. "I wanted to thank you again for yesterday." The investors were really impressed. They called the owner last night, said it was the best dining experience they've had here. "That's wonderful." Elaine replied simply, adjusting the flowers. Rebecca stepped closer, her guilt swirling. "I should have believed you. About the Mandarin, I shouldn't have spoken to you like that." Elaine paused, then looked at her with eyes that held neither anger nor pity, only calm understanding. "It's all right. We all learn in our own time." Those words, so gentle, pierced deeper than any accusation could have. Rebecca expected resentment, but all she received was forgiveness, and that forgiveness was far heavier than blame. All day, Elaine worked quietly as usual, but something was different about the way people looked at her. Customers noticed her now, not just for her work, but for her kindness. A few even asked to take photos with her after hearing the story from the waiters. Elaine laughed softly, refusing politely, saying, "I'm no one special. I just did what I could." But to them, she was special. In a world where pride spoke louder than compassion, her humility was rare, a kind of beauty that couldn't be faked. Later that afternoon, the restaurant owner himself, Mr. Liu, came in unexpectedly. He was a tall, calm man in his 50s with kind eyes. When he saw Elaine, he walked straight to her and said, "You must be Elaine. I heard about yesterday. You handled our guests with grace and respect." "Thank you." Elaine smiled. "I was happy to help, sir." Mr. Liu nodded. "You did more than help. You saved our relationship with them. They've already booked a second meeting. and they requested that you be there. The entire staff gasped softly. Elaine's cheeks flushed. Me? Oh no, sir, I don't think I... But Mr. Liu interrupted gently. Please, you've earned it. Don't hide what you're capable of. Rebecca watched from a distance, her chest tightening again, not from jealousy, but from realization. Elaine wasn't just a cleaning lady. She was someone extraordinary who had lived through more than most people could imagine and still chose kindness. That night, after closing, Rebecca lingered as the last of the staff clocked out. She found Elaine in the storage room, folding aprons neatly. You're amazing, you know that? She said quietly. Elaine chuckled, shaking her head. I'm just doing my part. Rebecca stepped closer. No, it's more than that. You've taught me something I didn't even realize I needed to learn. When I saw you yesterday, speaking Mandarin like that, I realized how small I'd been, how narrow my world was. I'm sorry, Elaine. Truly. Elaine looked up, her expression soft. Thank you, Rebecca. That means a lot. Rebecca swallowed, her voice trembling slightly. How did you learn to stay so calm, even when people treat you unfairly? Elaine smiled faintly. Because anger never changed anyone's heart. Only grace does. When someone hurts you, you can either reflect their pain or reflect your peace. I choose peace, even when it costs me. Rebecca's eyes stung. She hadn't expected such wisdom, not in a storage room, not from someone she'd underestimated. You're remarkable, she whispered. Elaine shook her head. No, just human. We all have pain. It's what we do with it that defines us. For the first time, Rebecca didn't know what to say. All her degrees, her experience, her pride, none of it compared to the quiet strength standing before her. She realized that leadership wasn't about power or title. It was about humility, about how you treat people when no one's watching. The next week, when the investors returned, Elaine was invited to sit with them. She wore a simple black dress, her hair neatly tied, her pendant, the jade stone David had given her, resting over her heart. She didn't boast or try to impress anyone. She simply spoke, listened, translated, and laughed. Her presence filled the room with calm. Rebecca watched from the side, feeling an emotion she hadn't felt in years, pride, but not in herself. Pride in someone else's light. After the meal, the investors once again praised Elaine, calling her a bridge between cultures. Mr. Liu smiled proudly, saying, She's family here. When everyone had left, Rebecca approached Elaine and said softly, You know, I think you've changed this place. Elaine smiled, her eyes warm but distant. Maybe just reminded people what matters. What's that? Rebecca asked. Respect, Elaine replied. It's a language everyone should learn. Rebecca nodded slowly, understanding more than words could express. She felt tears pressing at the corners of her eyes. For the first time, she didn't feel superior or ashamed. She just felt grateful. When Elaine left that evening, the entire staff waved her goodbye. She stepped into the cool night, her heart full. The street was quiet, the sky painted with the colors of dusk. She thought of her husband, of her daughter, of the long, painful road that had led her here. And for the first time in years, she felt truly seen. She whispered into the wind, Thank you for bringing me here, even through the pain. Somewhere behind her, the restaurant glowed warmly, not just from its lights, but from the kindness she had left inside it. A quiet reminder that one act of grace can ripple through hearts more powerfully than any speech or punishment ever could. And as she walked home, her step steady and sure, she carried with her not just the pride of what she'd done, but the peace of who she'd become, a woman who turned prejudice into purpose and disrespect into dignity. That evening, when the restaurant lights dimmed and the chatter of customers faded into night, Elaine stood alone in the quiet dining room, her reflection shimmering faintly in the glass windows. She was cleaning the last table, but her thoughts were far away. The world outside was still busy, but inside there was peace, a peace that felt both heavy and healing. She didn't know that her small act of kindness had already begun to ripple far beyond those restaurant walls. The investors had left glowing reviews, calling her a rare gem and the true face of compassion. Mr. Liu had forwarded their words to the restaurant's owners, who were deeply touched. Rebecca had printed out their message and kept rereading it, each line pressing deeper into her conscience. The story was spreading quietly, not as gossip, but as inspiration. The next day, when Elaine arrived, she was surprised to find Rebecca waiting by the entrance. There was something different about her. No blazer, no clipboard, no hardened expression. She looked softer, smaller, as if she had shed her armor overnight. "Elaine," she said, her voice gentle, "can we talk for a moment?" Elaine nodded, setting her bag aside. Rebecca took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what you said. The day you told me we all learn in our own time. I've been trying to understand that." She hesitated, then looked up, eyes glistening. "I judged you, not because of who you are, but because of what I assumed you couldn't be. That's not just wrong, it's cruel. And I'm sorry." Elaine studied her face for a moment, her expression calm. "Rebecca," she said softly, "we all come from different places. The world teaches some of us kindness, and some of us fear. But we can unlearn fear if we choose to." Rebecca's throat tightened. She blinked away the tears she didn't want to show. "How do you do it?" she whispered. "How do you stay kind to people who don't deserve it?" Elaine smiled, and for the first time, Rebecca saw something almost angelic in her face. Not perfection, but a strength that came from surviving pain without letting it destroy her soul. "Because I've seen what hate does," Elaine said. "It eats away at everything good inside you until there's nothing left but emptiness. But kindness heals even the person who gives it." Rebecca nodded slowly, her eyes shimmering. "You changed me, Elaine. You really did." Elaine placed a hand on her shoulder. Then it was worth it. In the days that followed, Rebecca began to act differently. She spoke more gently to the staff, asked about their families, even helped clean tables when the restaurant got busy. The others noticed. It wasn't the kind of change that comes from guilt. It was the kind that grows from humility. Elaine never took credit, never mentioned it. But she saw it, and she was proud. One afternoon, Mr. Liu called Elaine into his office. "Elaine," he said with a kind smile, "the owners and I have been discussing something. We want to promote you to cultural liaison and language coordinator. You will help us train the staff and welcome international guests. You've earned this." For a moment, Elaine was speechless. Her heart thudded softly in her chest. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he replied. "You belong here." Tears filled her eyes, and she nodded, whispering, "Thank you." That night, she went home and called her daughter Naomi. "Guess what, baby?" she said, laughing softly through tears. "Your mama got promoted." Naomi squealed on the other end. "I told you they'd see you, Mama. I told you." Elaine smiled, her heart swelling with pride and love. "Maybe they did," she said. "But even if they hadn't, it would have been okay. What matters is that we don't stop being who we are, even when others can't see it." The following week, the restaurant hosted another major event, a celebration dinner with the same investors. This time, Elaine stood confidently beside Rebecca, translating with grace, smiling with genuine joy. The staff moved like a team, supporting one another. When the evening ended, the guests stood to applaud. "This restaurant," one of them said, "is not just known for its food anymore, it's known for its heart." As the applause filled the room, Elaine looked across the table and saw Rebecca smiling at her, not with pride, but with respect. It was a simple moment, but it meant everything. Later that night, as the restaurant emptied, Rebecca brought 2 cups of tea to a quiet corner table where Elaine was sitting. "You know," Rebecca said, handing her one, "when I first took this job, I thought leadership meant control. But you've shown me it means compassion. You taught me something no textbook ever could." Elaine chuckled softly. "Maybe that's because life is the best teacher." Rebecca smiled. "And you're one of its best students." They sat there for a while, sipping tea in comfortable silence. For once, there was no hierarchy between them, just 2 women, 2 souls, sitting side by side, sharing warmth after a long winter of misunderstanding. When Elaine left that evening, she paused at the door, turned to look back one last time. The restaurant lights glowed softly behind her. She thought of all the things she had lost in her life, her husband, her home, her career, and realized that none of it had truly been wasted. Every tear, every struggle, every cruel word had led her to this moment of quiet redemption. As she stepped into the cool night, the city lights flickered like stars against the wet pavement. She closed her eyes, breathing the crisp air, and whispered to herself, "Thank you, David. Thank you for teaching me to keep loving." In that whisper was everything she had become, her strength, her faith, her forgiveness. Kindness had not made her weak. It had made her invincible. Weeks later, a new plaque appeared on the restaurant wall near the entrance. It read, "In honor of Elaine Porter, for teaching us that true language is kindness." Customers would stop to read it, often asking who she was. And those who worked there would smile, their voices soft with respect, saying, "She's a reason this place feels like home." Elaine never boasted about it. She continued to work with the same humility, helping others learn, guiding them with patience. But whenever she passed that plaque, she felt a warmth deep in her heart. Not pride, but peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you've turned pain into purpose. And somewhere in a quiet corner of the city, a woman who had once been mocked for her Mandarin had rewritten the meaning of respect. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with kindness so powerful it silenced prejudice itself. Her story became more than just one of triumph. It became a reminder that the greatest victories don't come from proving others wrong. They come from staying true to what's right. Elaine's life, her quiet grace, her unwavering belief in humanity, whispered truth the world so often forgets. You can't fight darkness with darkness. You light a candle and let it shine.